The sergeant didn't have all of them. The girl is coming today? Come to the library. Huh? Come to the library. That's one of the things on my book. Why? He's got a dog house. I got a dog. Somebody in there. Dr. Jill. Hey. What do you want to say? Who's this? That's Steve. Steve Carpel. Betty, remember it's not the place that owns the it's not the place that owns the name. Remember that owns the place. No, you have the mental capacity to remember. Okay, gentlemen, I'm going to get us started because we got a lot of Gemara to try to cover today. Okay. I'm going to leave before some learning breaks. Learning sponsorships, a year of learning the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of Toby Paris, Saratova Bad Yisrael Dov in her memory. Friends of Nina Monester, Nechama Hazna Bad Yitzchak Aharon. Many friends of Stephen Vigdor, Lezecha Nishmat Simcha Melech B'Meir Leib Halevi. Friends of Marcy Kurtz, in memory of her great niece, Leah Bracha Bas Rivka. Isaac and Evelyn Blachor, in memory of his sister, Chaya Rachel Bas Isser. A month of learning by Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of Jill's mother, Bela Bas Abraham, and Perry's father, David Ben Fishel Halevi. Mark Linder, in memory of his mother, Yona Bat Zalman Leib. Rabbi Isaac Schmerler, in memory of his wife, Menyasima Bat Yitzchak Isaac. Friends of Marilyn Schmerler, in her memory, Menyasima Bat Yitzchak Isaac. A week of learning by Judy Iger, in memory of her father-in-law, Shlomo Michal Ben Aharon, by Sid Paris, excuse me, in memory of his wife, Saratova Bad Yisrael Dov, by Jack Gilman, in memory of his mother, Elka Bad Yeshayahu, by Alan Blumenfeld, in memory of his father, Gershon Ben Haver Pinchas HaKohen, David Mindel Cheslow, in memory of his mother, Bela Bas Meir, Sam and Shifra Coleman, in memory of his father, Yaakov Ben Shmuel. Have also a day of learning today by Natalie Goldstein, in memory of her husband, Kalman Ben Eliyahu Hersh Halevi. Okay, and we've been saying also Refuah Shlema for Peret Semach Ben Yaakov Yitzchak. And Shamas have an Aliyah, Kranker Afia, Velti Yeshir Shamat Miyah, and Chol B'nai Israel Good Gaben Shtia. All right. So where are we? In the Gemara on Kaf Zayin, Amud Aleph is where we're going to begin with the Mishnah. Am I right? Yes. Okay. All right. So we're trying to get a little bit, as I said, ahead. So we'll see where we'll be by the end of the week. Okay. So we're back to a situation where, since we've seen in the Gemara that when a woman says, I was captive and I'm still pure, okay, that was part of the discussion, whether there had to be Eidim to support her view. Clearly, if there were Eidim that said, yes, indeed, she's Tahora, she's to be believed, okay? And the Chachamim were Mekil on that situation, that even if she said without Eidim, okay, that could be possible that she could be believed. Okay, so given that context, we move into the new Mishnah, and the new Mishnah is going to give us a slightly different scenario. Okay, one may have thought, okay, that if there was a suspicion that a woman, okay, was held captive or could have been raped, okay, that particularly for a Kohen, that was a problem, and therefore she could not return to him. And that's what we're going to see as we start in the middle of the Amud, Kaf Zayin Amud Aleph, about right halfway down a new Mishnah. Okay? All right. Following Mishnah says, Ir shekavshua karkum. If it was a city that had been conquered by an army that laid siege to it. Okay? Kol kohanot shenimtzeu betocha psulot. Okay? Now, kol kohanot here can be understood, I suggest, in one of two ways. Basic way would be wives that are married to Kohanim. Okay? That's clearly one case. Okay? Others could be women who are the daughters of Kohanim. Okay? They could still also be considered in that. So any woman whose status was somewhat related to a Kohen, okay? But particularly those who were married to Kohanim, okay? The problem is, right? They are not considered psulot. They are not eligible to go back to their husbands. Okay? V'im yesh lahen edim, says the Mishnah, but if they have witnesses, okay, that testify that they are tahorot, okay, afilu eved, even if it's a servant, afilu shivcha, even if it's a female servant, harei elu ne'emanin, then they are believed that they can go back to their husbands. Okay? Ve'ein ne'eman adam al yedei atzmo, but a person is not to be believed on their own. In other words, her own testimony in that case, okay, is not acceptable. If she simply says, no, I am tahora, there's a problem there. Now, what is the situation here? The basic assumption found in the Mishnah is that an army coming in to conquer the city is going to rape and pillage. Okay, and therefore that is the basic assumption. We're going to see, however, that the Gemara, remember, is going to raise some other kinds of questions that apply to that basic assumption as well. Okay, so we pick up now. We're minhu, but we'll contradict this with the following, says the Gemara. Baleshet. Baleshet is a group of troops that are scouting or reconnoitering, right? Some want to translate it as marauding, okay? But not an entire army laying siege, okay? If they shaba'a le'ir b'sha'at shalom, if they come to the town, the city, during a time of peace, what happens here? Says the Gemara, chavayot ptuchot asurot, any open barrels of wine are prohibited, stumot mutarot, but closed barrels of wine are permitted. Okay, the implication is they'll have their, they'll carouse and things like that during a peaceful time, and take drink, things like that, but otherwise it's different than a situation of a siege, okay, and what's assumed there. B'sha'at milchama, but if it's a time of warfare, elu va'elu mutarot, okay, both these closed and open barrels are permitted. Why? Lafi she'en panai lenasech. Why? Because they have no time during warfare to go through their normal pagan idol worshiping rituals. Okay, that's the point. Amar Rav Meri, says Rav Meri, live all yesh panai, but even that kind of a group, they would have to rape, to have intercourse, they would have time. Okay, linasech, okay, and panai. but to have ritual practices, they wouldn't have time. Okay, the implication again being that that they would be quick to rape, but do not, go on with a long-term ritual service. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Eliezer, Rabbi Yitzchak bar Elazar, Mishmei de Chizkiah Amar, in the name of Chizkiah. Kan bekarkum shel otam malchut. On the one hand, maybe we're talking about a siege by the existing authority, the existing kingdom. Kan bekarkum shel malchut acheret. The other is a siege by an attacking, a foreign monarch. So there's going to be a difference there, he says. Okay, shel otam malchut, when it's a time of the same monarchy, nami iyavshar delo arak chad minayu. So the argument, says the Gemara, is here too. Even if it's a siege by the existing monarch in which that town is located, isn't there a chance that an individual soldier will wander off and rape some woman? Isn't that possible? And she could be the wife of a Kohen, and therefore she would be forbidden. Okay? Amar, okay, and since we wouldn't know for sure, okay, whose it is, all right, per se, it's a problem. Amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, he says, Keshem mishmarot ro'ot, right, zo et zo. But we're talking about a situation where the sentries, excuse me, are watching one another. In other words, wouldn't the sentries prevent a soldier from wandering off from their camp, let's say? And therefore that wouldn't sentries of the soldiers, right? In other words, they're going to have sentries stationed around their campsite, right? Things like that. Iafshar deloma nema porta. Isn't it? So the Gemara answers to that suggestion. It's impossible that they might not fall asleep a little bit, the sentries. So you still have to be suspect of the possibility that there could be individual soldiers who would go off and do that. Okay, so what happens? Amar Rabbi Levi. Says Rabbi Levi, Kigon Shemahadar La Lamata Shushilta. Okay, so he says there, okay, that the possibility is that that the townspeople, okay, what they've done, they set up for themselves, they've surrounded their area, okay, with some sort of protection. I'm going to use that word in general. That's how they surrounded their town. What might they have used? Shushilta, they may have used chains, okay? Or vikalba, they may have had dogs on the outside of the town. Vigoza, or they might have spikes, okay, or branches of trees, okay, so that if somebody came into the town, they would have to climb over the branches and the branches would break, and that would, people would hear that. Va'avaza, okay, or they have geese, okay. Corin had an interesting, that poor towns would use geese on the outside because male geese are very protective of their turf, okay, and anybody coming close, they would think that they're trying to steal their food and would start honking and things like that.
I've mentioned Curacao a couple times. We used to walk from my son-in-law's house to shul, and all the houses there had walls.
Yeah.
Not 6 feet high, but some type of wall around it. And usually dogs running around. As you walk by, dogs would bark.
Yeah.
But a couple houses had geese.
Yeah.
The geese make more noise than the dogs.
Okay.
You really cross the street to get away from the geese. Because
Okay, good. All right. All right. So that's Maaseh Shahaya that supports the Gemara. Thank you, Ted. Amar Rabbi Abba bar Zavta. What does he say? Plige bar Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya v'Rabbanan. And there was an argument about this between Rabbi Yehuda Nasiya and the rabbis. Chad Amar, says one, Kan bekarkum shel otam malchut. One says it was in regards to the siege laid by the existing authority of the in the region. Kan bekarkum shel malchut acheret. And other, in this case, the difference is that it was a siege laid by an attacking monarchy. Velo kasha, le velo mide. And this was not a problem for him. Bechad kasha le kohani. And the other one had a problem with all of this. Umashani. And his response was, Kigon de mahadar le lamata. And the example was, what they would do is they would surround the town with either chains or with rikalba, dogs, vigoza, or with branches or spikes, v'avaza, and with geese. Amar Rav Idi bar Avin, he says, Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Ashin. Again, im yesh machboa achat. If there's a hideout, a place where women might go, okay, to hide from the invading troops, right? Matzelet al hakohanot kulan. This hideout could save if a number of women could hide there. Let's say there's a basement or something. Okay. Right.
That's only one hiding place. It could be for many people.
It could be for many people, exactly, right? It could save multiple women, right?
But couldn't you interpret it as a single hiding place?
Well, that's what the Gemara is going to get to. Zev, good, Mabuch Shekivanta. By Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yirmiyah came and asked the following: Eina machazeket ele echat. What happens? That's your questions, right? What happens if the hiding place is only sufficient to hold one woman? Mahu, what's the situation? Right? Mi amrinan kol chada v'chada hainu ha. Do we say among all these wives of Kohanim that this is the one who got to the hiding place, and therefore she should be permitted, and all the others would be forbidden?
The Kohen's wife be on a higher level, be hid than somebody else.
Not necessarily. Okay, we don't know. Oh, Dilma lo amrinan, or perhaps we don't say that. Umay shna mishnei tashavili. And what's the difference then if there are two paths or two roads into the town? Okay, how is this different, okay, than a situation where we have another example, okay, of potential tuma, namely the following: an example where we have a braita that tells us there are two pathways, echad tameh ve'echad tahor. On one pathway, we know for sure that there's a grave, and anyone who walks on that pathway, okay, is going to become tameh. But the other pathway, we're pretty sure there is no grave, and anybody who walks in that pathway is going to be tahor. So what happens? V'halach be'echad mehen v'asat tahorot. And somebody walks along one of those pathways, and then later he handles tahor objects. Uba chavero v'halach b'sheni. And then along comes a second person, his neighbor, okay, on the second path, and he handles tahor objects. Now, clearly, as a result, at least one of them had to have gone on the path where the grave was. And so therefore, at least one of the two of them is tameh, right? Logically, that's the point. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, says Rabbi Yehuda, im nish'al zeh b'fnei atzmo v'zeh b'fnei atzmo. If we ask each one of them separately, toharot, each could be declared tahor, because one could say, hey, Marty went on the path that was tahor, and I went on the, no, I could say Marty was on the Tameh path and I went the Tahor path. And Marty could argue, no, I went the Tahor path and Green went on the Tameh path. Okay, so therefore we would declare both of them Tahor. Shnehem ke'achat. But if the two of them ask at the same time, Tameot, we could say both of them are Tameh. Because how do I know that this one didn't go on the Tameh path? Or how do I know this one didn't go on the Tameh path? Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, Vein kachu vein kach tmein. Rabbi Yossi says, regardless, okay, since we're sure that at least one of them had to be Tameh, and we don't know for sure which one, we're declaring both of them Tameh. So likewise, we would use the same parallel example with the one wife of a Kohen, the single wife of the Kohen who hid. We don't know which one it was among a number, and therefore we're going to declare them all Tameh. That's the point.
Don't we say that some of the sister Rabin, the subject is Taha, but that's called the people walking on the road because the sister Rabin they're walking on. But with the women, the hiding place, that's the sister Yachid.
That could be Rishus Yachid. Good point, Mike. That could be another reason. Okay, let's see if the Gemara brings that as the reason or if not. Okay, but that's a good point. Very good. Va'amar Rava, and Rava says, Ve'itema Rabbi Yochanan, and others say Rabbi Yochanan, Bevat echat divrei hakol tmein. Okay, if they come and raise the question, then they're all tameh. Bezeh achar zeh divrei hakol tahorim. If they come one after another, then they're all going to be declared tahor. Lo nichlaku ela bebalish alav ba'al chaveiro. Okay, the rabbis were not in dispute, except in a situation where one came to ask after the other. Why? Mar medame le levavat echat. One master held in that situation, it's as similar to when they came all together. Umar medame le levazeh achar zeh. And the other compared it, okay, to if they come one after the other. Right? Bahachanami. And here too, in our case, kevan deshari laholakuhu. Okay, since he might permit all of them, kevat echadami. It was as if they all came at one time. Gemara asks, Hachi hashta, can you really compare the situations? Hatam, there in that case, vadai ikatuma, with the example of the paths and the grave along one path. There, it's very clear that we have certainly a situation of tumah. Hacha, in our case of the hiding place of the women, and whether or not the women get raped, right? Mi yimar de'itme, it's possible that one might say that she became raped? We don't know for sure. Okay, by Rav Ashi. And so Rav Ashi then comes and says, Amra, what if she says as follows? Lo nichbeti velo nimeti. I did not hide, but I was not tamei. Okay, mahu. What's the situation? Says the Gemara. Right? Mi amrinan. Do we say in that case, right? Mali l'shaker. Okay, that it's what possibility is there of her lying? O dilma lo amrinan. Or perhaps we don't say that. So the phrase mali l'shaker, okay, is somewhat of a kind of hapesha asar hapesha shahitir situation, or it's somewhat similar to a migo situation. In other words, what advantage, she could have told us something, okay, without lying, and it would have put her in a better situation, okay? But since she didn't tell that, and it's apparently telling the truth, okay, then our tendency is to believe her, okay? So that's the Mali L'Shaker concept, okay? So the Gemara answers now, Umaishna mehahu ma'aseh. And how is that different from the following incident? Dahahu gavra, da agar le chamra lechavre. What did he do? He rented a donkey to his neighbor. Amarle, and he said to the neighbor, Lo tizil ba'orcha denahar pekod. Don't go along the road that borders the Pekod River, the Ikamaya, because there's frequently water. Okay, in other words, the river overflows and you're going to have a problem, okay, on that roadway. Zil ba'orcha denarash the Lekamaya. Go along the roadway by the Narish River, okay, where there is no water. Okay? What happens? Va'azal ihu ba'orcha denahar pekod. But that fellow who rented the donkey, nevertheless, I'm going to put in, went along the roadway by the Pekod River, umit chamra, and the donkey died. Okay? What happened? Ata lekame de Rava, this incident they brought, and he came before Rava. Amarle, and he said to Rava, and yes, ba'orcha denahar pekod azle. Yes, I did go along the Pekod River way. Mihu lo havi maya, but nevertheless, there was no water there. Okay? Implying that the donkey died for other reasons. Okay? So in other words, he could have lied and said, no, I went on the Narash River road. Okay? But he admitted that he went on the Pekod River road. So therefore, that's where we get the basis of Mali the Shakir. Is it possible that he could have lied because he had the migo, or he had the choice that he could have lied and given himself a better excuse? Okay. So what happens? Amar Rava, says Rava, Mali the Shakir. Okay, we have the example of is what reason therefore that he could have lied. Ibaye amarle ba'orcha denarishasle. If it was necessary, or if he had wanted to, he could have said that I went by the road of the Narish River, right? Va'amarle Abaye. So now Abaye responds to that situation as follows. Mali l'shakir b'makom edim lo amrinan. Okay, but we don't utilize that line of reasoning of Mali l'shakir, okay, when there's a situation where witnesses are available and they could give some sort of testimony. Okay. Hachi hashta. So the Gemara says, can you really compare the situations? Hatam, there, vadai ika edim de ika maya. There could very well have been witnesses to indicate whether there was water or not. Hacha, here, vadai itmai. Here, in our case of the wives of the Kohanim, are we sure? Do we have any real proof that they became tameh? Chashashahu, where it's a suspicion, right? Ubakom chashasha omrinan. Okay, and in a place when there's only suspicion, we can say that perhaps the person might not lie, but they would be telling the truth. Okay? Now, our next piece from our Mishnah, right? Im yesh edim afilu eved va'afilu shifcha ne'amani. If there are witnesses, even if it's the male servant or the female servant believed. Okay? So the Gemara now picks up on this. Okay? Va'afilu shifcha dida mehimna. Do we say that even the female servant of the woman, okay, that servant is believed? Or minhe, but we'll challenge this, okay? About a situation where there is a husband who has written out a bill of divorce for his wife, but he hasn't had it delivered to her yet. Okay? And we're told, lo tit yached imo, that she should not be secluded with him. Ella, rather, al pi edim, except if there were some sort of witnesses to give testimony. Right? Va'afilu al pi eved, even if it's done by a male servant. Va'al pi shifcha, even if the witness is a female servant. Chutz mishifchata, okay, with the exception of the woman's female servant, mipnei sheliba gas b'shifchata. Why? Because her heart, namely the woman, the mistress, we'll use that term for the moment, she is, I'm going to use the word comfortable, okay, with her female servant. In other words, she would not hesitate to have relations with this man, okay, even if the female servant was, so to speak, around, okay? Right? Amar Rav Papi, says Rav Papi, the following, Bishfuya Hekelu. He says, no, we have a unique situation here, is that the rabbis were lenient in a situation when a woman was held as a prisoner. Rav Papa Amar, and further Rav Papa says, Ha b'shifcha dida. Here in one situation, we're talking about the witness being her servant woman. Ha b'shifcha didei. And in another situation, we're talking about the female servant being his female servant. Okay? In other words, if it's his female servant, maybe they're more apt to accept her testimony that there was no relations. Okay? So what happens? V'shifcha dida lo mehimna. And are we saying that her female servant is not to be believed? Hakatani. But here it's taught as follows. Ein adam me'id al atzmo. A person cannot give testimony about oneself. That's what our Mishnah said at the end. Ha shifcha dida mehimna. This would seem to imply that if it were her female servant, she should be believed. Says the Gemara, shifchata nami ke'atzma dami. No, the female servant of the mistress is almost like the mistress herself. In other words, they are so connected, intertwined, that would be almost the same as if she herself had been giving the testimony. Okay? So what happens? Rav Ashi Amar, says Rav Ashi, Havaha b'shifcha dida. Okay? Both this case and the other case, okay, are in regarding the testimony being given by her maidservant. V'shifcha mechazeh chazia v'shatka. But we're going to see, it's just, what about the situation where the shifcha sees what's going on, but she's silent, right? Hatam, there in regards to that conditional divorce where the husband wrote the get but didn't give it to her and they're not supposed to be together, right? The shatikta matirta. It's the fact that there in that case, the silence of the female servant is what permits the woman, okay? And therefore, in other words, lo mehimna, and that's why she's not believed. Okay, if she knows that her servant woman is not going to speak out about what happened, she may go ahead and do something with the husband, with that man, and that's why the servant woman is not believed. Hacha, here, the shatikta osarta, but in this particular case, where we could say that the testimony of the servant woman would make the mistress okay, her mistress forbidden to her husband, mehimna, in that situation, okay, that would make, then we would say that the mistress, the servant woman's testimony could be believable, okay, in that case. All right, so the Gemara goes on, hashtanami, here too, atya mishakra, maybe she's going to come and lie, okay? In other words, she's going to lie to benefit her mistress. Okay? So the Gemara's answer is tarte lo avda. Two wrongs the woman is not going to do. She's not going to be both silent about the violation, okay? And she's also not going to lie about it. Okay? Kiha demari bar isik. Okay, as was a comment by Mari bar Isik, va'amre la Chana bar Isik, and others say it was Chana bar Isik, atale acha mi bechuzah, okay, that whose brother came, okay, from Bechuzah, Amarle, and he said to him, palog li b'nichsei da Abba, okay, this brother came, okay, from a location, a distant location, and he says to the gentleman, to either Mari or to Chanu, whichever his name was, divide for me a section of the father's property. Amarle, he responded to the fellow, Lo yadanalach, I don't know you. Okay. Ata lekame de Rav Chisda. He came before Rav Chisda. Amarle, and he said to him, Shapir ka'amarlach. Well, you said the appropriate thing. Well said. Why? Dichtiv, because it's written, Vayaker Yosef et Achiv, Vehem lo hikiruhu. That Joseph recognized his brothers, but they did not recognize him. Okay, so how could he know for sure that this fellow who claimed a portion of the father's property was supposedly really a brother, right? Milamed sheyatsa below chatimat zaken, uba b'chatimat zaken. Maybe it's similar to the example with Yosef, that he went out without a beard. In other words, remember he was a young man then, and he comes back now with a beard. Okay, so that would be a way of maybe a problem in recognizing. Amarle, he said to him, Zil aite sahade the achvaat. Okay, go and bring witnesses that you're a brother. Amarle, okay, itle sahade, I have witnesses. Umistafinu mine de gavra. Okay, all right. Almahu. He says, but what happens? My witnesses are afraid of him, namely of this Mari or Chuna, whatever his name was, right? Why? The Gavra Almahu. Because he's a powerful or a violent person, right? Amarle ledide zil aitinhu at. So he said to him, all right, you go and bring witnesses. The lav achuchahu, that I'm not your brother. Amarle, and the fellow responded, Dina hachi, is that really the law? Isn't the law the following? Hamotze mechavaro alav haraya. Okay, that the one who wants to remove from his another person any amount of money, he has to bring the proof. Amarle hachi da'inana lach ulakuhu al mechavarech. Okay, so his answer to him here, okay, that all of these people are powerful or mighty people, okay, and therefore Again, this is a problem about bringing witnesses. Hashtanami, atu mishakre. Here too, maybe one might come. They might come and lie. Gemara's answer is tarte lo avde. These two kinds of things they're not going to do. Okay. So in other words, this dispute over the testimony, okay, of the slave women, all right, that's of the servant woman. She's not going to do both. So the Gemara says, lema ketanai. Okay, let us say then that this is similar to a machloket of Tanaim, where zu edut ish v'isha, tinok v'tinoket, aviha v'ima, v'achya v'achota. Okay, in other words, that the question of the status of witnesses in this situation, okay, could be the following. If it's testimony that's brought by a man or a woman, by a child, male or a female child, by her father or her mother, by her brother or her sister, aval lo benah, but not by her son, ubita, or by her daughter, lo avda, okay, not her servant, v'shifchata, and not her female servant. Okay, so this is what the argument about over testimony there. V'tanya idach, and then another Braita teaches, hakol ne'emanin laha'id, all are worthy, are believed to bring testimony, chutz mehemna u'ba'ala, with the exception of herself and her husband. In other words, if it was a captive woman to be allowed back to her husband, she cannot testify, nor her husband could testify. The Rav Papi u'the Rav Ashi tana'ahi. Why? Because Rav Papi and Rav Ashi are Tanaim, and this is what they were arguing about. The Rav Papi, milema tana'ahi. Are you saying that Rav Papi really, his statements have the authority like Tanaim? Amar lach, Rav Papa. So Rav Papa says as follows, he explains, Kitanya hahi b'mesicha lefi tuma. Okay, what happens is that situation was such that they were just talking offhandedly, okay? And that therefore that, if that's the case, their testimony should be believed. Okay? For example, Kiha dechiata Rav Dimi amar Rav Chanan, like the case when Rav Dimi came and he told us about Rav Chanan, namely Carthagina, who came from Carthage, Mishta'e, okay, that he related the following story. Okay? So Rav Dimi is telling a story that he heard from Rav Chanan of Carthage, okay, namely the following story. Ma'aseh ba lifnei Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. There was an incident that came before Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. Va'amrei la Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi mishta'e. And others say it was Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi himself who related the following incident. Ma'aseh ba lifnei Rabbi, okay, an incident occurred before Rabbi. Ba'adam echad shahaya masiach lefi tumo. That a man who was speaking offhandedly said as follows. Va'amar, saying, Ani, okay, ve'imi, I and my mother, nishbenu levein ha'ovdei kochavim, we were held captive by Gentiles. Yatsati l'shov mayim, okay, I went out to draw water. Da'ati imi, and my mind was on my mother. Lilakate etzim, I went out to gather wood. Da'ati al imi, my mind was on my mother. In other words, All the time he was thinking about her and concerned about her welfare. All right, what happens? Vehesiya Rabbi lekuhuna alpi. And Rabbi then permitted her to marry a Kohen, because that was an example of a son testifying that he was always aware of the status of his mother and therefore would know whether or not she had become Tameah or not. So,
Wasn't it also because he was speaking casually?
and it was because he was speaking casually.
That's very important.
Right. Okay. All right. We now go to our new Mishnah. Okay, we're going to continue a bit, all right, more today as well as we have the time. Matnit in our new Mishnah. Amar Rabbi Zechariah. Okay. Now, Rabbi Zechariah, we need to know, is a Kohen. All right. It doesn't tell us that, but Rabbi Zechariah ben Hakatzah. Okay. So what happens? He takes an oath in this Mishnah. Hama'on hazeh. His oath is by the divine abode. Okay. Lo zaza yada mitoch yadi misha shenichnesu ovdei kochavim Yerushalayim. He's taking an oath that my hand never left the hand of my wife throughout the entire time when the Gentiles entered Jerusalem. Va'ad shiatsu, and until they left. Amrulo, and the sages said to him, Ein adam me'id al atzmo, that a person cannot bring testimony on himself, on his own situation. Okay? Okay. It gives credence to the rabbinic expression, by the way, when one is nogea b'davar. Okay, here's a real example of nogea b'davar. Okay, all right, let's go on. Gemara, Tana, we're taught in the bright. Va'afal pichein yichev la bayit b'chetzro. Nevertheless, says the Braita, what did Rabbi Zechariah ben Katzav do as a Kohen? He didn't totally put her out. He allowed her to have a residence in the same courtyard that he lived in. Ukashehi yotzah, and when she would go out of the house, yotzah berosh baneha, she would go out ahead of all her children. In other words, she would go out, the children would then follow her, and so then he would leave, so he would not be alone with her even in the courtyard. Ukashehi nichneset, and when she would come back into that house, nichneset basof, she would enter in the back. Basof baneha, she would enter behind, okay, her children. So he would go in first, then the children, and then she would enter. Okay? So in other words, she would never be alone. By Abaye. And so Abaye asks as follows. Mahu la'asod begrusha kain? Is it possible to do likewise with a divorced woman? Hatam, there, hu de b'shvuyahi kilu. There in that case, okay, that was a situation of her being, in a sense, captive, because they were both in the city when it was besieged by foreigners, right? And that's why the rabbis were lenient and allowed her to live in a house in the same courtyard with him. Aval hachan, but in our case of a divorcee, lo, no, we may not say that's parallel. O dilma lo shana, or maybe there's no difference. Tashma, listen to the following bright. The Tanya as taught. Hamigaresh et ishto, one who divorces his wife, lo tinaseh b'shchunato. Okay, one should not live in the same neighborhood. Okay, let's go on. All right, top of Kafchet. right? V'im haya kohen, and if you were a kohen, lo tidor imo b'mabui. She cannot even live with him in the same alleyway. Im haya kfar katan, and if it was in a small village, okay, right? Even if they're not married, right? Says Rashi, by the way, zehaya ma'aseh. That was the incident. Va'amru kfar katan nidon kishchuna. That a small village or town is considered like the same neighborhood. So one would have to move out of that town. Our question then is appropriately asked by the Gemara, Mi nidche mipnei mi? Who gets put out or who moves out from whom? Tashma, says the Braita, the Tanya, as taught now in a Braita. He nidchet mipnei mipanav ve'ein hu nidche mipaneha. She gets put out from him, but he does not get put off from her. Ve'im haita chatzer shala, and if the courtyard really belonged to her, hu nidche mipaneha, then he gets put out from her. Ibailahu. So they asked, right? Haita chatzer shel shnehem, mahu. If the courtyard belonged to both of them, what's the situation there? Tashma, says the Brighton. He nidchet mipanav. Okay, she gets put out from him. B'mayaskinan, what are we dealing with here? Ilema bechatzar shalo pshita. If we're saying that the courtyard belonged to him, that should be obvious. Ve'ela bechatzar shala. But rather, we must be talking about a situation where the courtyard was hers. Vahatanya. But aren't we taught elsewhere in a Braita? Im hayta chatzer shala, hu nidche mipaneha, that if the courtyard belonged to her, he is put out before her? Ela lav. Rather, the following, that's not the case. Ki hai gavna, as in the following situation, Dilma da agir migar, that perhaps the space in the courtyard is being rented. Ma'i have Allah. So what is the end result here? Tashma. Listen to the following Braita. Okay, pasuk that tells us, Hine Hashem, okay, metal tucha, taltala gava. That the pasuk basically says that Hashem, right, hurls the man away violently as a man. Okay, what does that imply? Amar Rav, says Rav, till tule de gavra kashin mida itata. Namely, the sending away of a man is more difficult, produces more violence than the sending the way of a woman. Okay? Now, another Braita, Tanu Rabbanan, okay, Leva himena b'nichsei aviha. Okay, if the man that was married to this woman had borrowed property from her father, okay, and let's say he's a Kohen who's divorcing her, right, and he borrowed property, Einan nifra'at ela al yidei acher. He cannot have any other payment back to her, okay, or arrangement of the debt. That has to be done through another person. Okay. Amar Rav Sheshet, says Rav Sheshet, Ve'i atu lekaman ladina, and were they to have to come to court on this debt situation, lo mizdakakinan laho. What do we say? They cannot attend. Rav Papa Amar, says Rav Papa, Shamute mishamtinan lahu. Okay, that if they try to attend, we put them in shamta, in a kind of ban, almost excommunication. Rav Huna bered the Rav Yoshua Amar, he says as follows, Nigude nami menagdinam lahu, that we're also going to flog them. We're going to give them lashes, okay? Because the Beis Din says they shouldn't appear, okay? Amar Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, Tana, okay? What happens? Ba'avel Rabati. There's a Mishnah that taught in Avel Rabati, okay, another Masechet, B'med Varim Amorim, Shenit Garsha Min HaNisuin, that this talking about it's a scenario when the divorced from a wedding, Aval Shenit Garsha Min HaErusin, but when there's a separation, a divorce from simply betrothal, and I put simply in parentheses, nifrad ayedei atzma, then the payment of the collection of the debt can be done by herself. She'ein libo gaspa. Why? Because the man, okay, who is separating from her, he has no close association with her. He wouldn't take advantage. Vahahu, so the Gemara continues, Hahu arus va'arusato, and there was a situation where there was a fiance and a woman fianced, da'atu lekame de Rava, and they came before Rava. Yativ Rav Ada bar Matna kame, and Yav Rav Ada bar Amatna was also sitting there. Okay, Rava shlucha ben Taihu, and Rava had Rav Ada bar Matna. He made him a intermediary and had them sit between the two, the man and the woman. Okay, Amarle Rav Ada bar Matna, and he said to him, Vaha Amar Rav Nachman. But didn't Rav Nachman tell the following? Tana ba'evel Rabati, that it was taught in Evel Rabati the following, etc., etc. Amarle, he said to him, Kachazinin de kagaise bahadade. Okay, he told to him, come and see that they are gaise bahadade. They are exchanging looks at each other. Okay, in other words, there's still some sense of perhaps potential intimacy involved here. Okay, Ika da Amre, and there are others who say, Lo okay Rabba Shaliach ben Tayu, that Rabba did not put an intermediary between them, and Amarle Rav Adabar Matana, and Rav Adabar Matana said to him, Nikum Mar Shlucha ben Tayu, shall the master put an intermediary between them? Amarle, and he responded, Vaha Amar Rav Nachman, but did not Rav Nachman say, Tana ba'evel Rabati, it was taught in Evel Rabati, etc., etc. Amarle, and he said to him, Hani mili, heicha delo gaise bahadade. That's a situation where there is no potential for intimacy between them. Aval hani kachazina laho the gaise bahadade. But here, with these, we see that there is some potential of intimacy possible still. So we're going to stop right there today, okay, on Kafchet, and then, okay, it's still a fairly lengthy Gemara tomorrow, but Kaftet is fairly short, and Lamed is fairly short, so we should be able to. Right?
What do you do about Shabbos? There was nothing listed on the.
No, there's no The shul's minhag, I checked with the rabbi again, the shul's minhag is not to have a public shiur, okay, on Erev Tisha B'Av. Okay, so we will try to move further.
There's no listener.
There's a machloket, and if one learns before Chatzot, it's one thing. So,
Why don't we have the shiur before Chatzot?
well, that would mean we would all have to go to the Hashkama, right?
There's plenty of room.
Okay, and learn, and then have the, we'll think about it. Okay,
Or we could come early and learn before the davening.
or learn before the davening, before 8:30.
Yeah.
Okay, that's
Some
in,
say at 8 o'clock,
what?
could get together at 8 o'clock.
That's another, we'll think about it. We'll see what's viable. Okay,
I thought you were going to your job. What happened?
What?
You came back?
I took this.
Oh, you just finished davening?
all right. Okay,
Go, Rabbi,
all right.